In our time, we will defend the land we love, and we will act on the ideals that gave it birth. In America, we've not always lived up to our ideals, yet we always reach for them. We believe that everyone deserves a chance, that everyone has value, that no insignificant person was ever born. We believe that all are diminished when any are hopeless. We are one people, committed to building a single nation of justice and opportunity. America rejects bigotry. Every faith is practiced and protected here because we are one country. Every immigrant can be fully and equally American because we're one country. Race and color should not divide us because America is one country. These American ideals of opportunity and equality come to us across the generations, and they have attracted millions from across the world. Yet there are young Americans growing up here under this flag who doubt the promise and justice of our country. They hear talk of opportunity and see little evidence of opportunity around them. Every American must believe in the promise of America. And to reach this noble, necessary goal, there is a role for government. We are generous and caring people. The policies of our government must heed the universal call of all faiths to love a neighbor as we would want to be loved ourselves. We need a government that is focused, effective, and close to the people. A government that does a few things and does them well. Government cannot solve every problem, but it can encourage people and communities to help themselves and to help one another. Often the truest kind of compassion is to help citizens build lives of their own. I call my philosophy and approach compassionate conservatism. It is compassionate to actively help our fellow citizens in need. It is conservative to insist on responsibility and on results. And with this hopeful approach, we can make a real difference in people's lives.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President and CEO of the George W. Bush Presidential Center, Ken Hirsch.
Good morning and welcome to the 2019 Forum on Leadership. And with thanks to our presenting sponsor, Pioneer Natural Resources, thank you for your support. You know, today we're in a period of solid economic growth, near record low unemployment, yet there's a lot of anxiety around. And I asked myself the question, if times are so good, why do we feel so anxious? And at its core, I believe the reason comes back to three major forces that are at play today. The fiscal realities from the 2009 financial crisis are now in full view. A demographic shift is upon us, combined with the accelerating pace of technological change. These forces are causing an intergenerational conflict that we're now experiencing. First, over money. 83 million millennials who have come of age since the financial crisis and will comprise 75% of the workforce in this country by the year 2030 are now aware that the baby boom generation left them a $22 billion federal and growing tax bomb, or debt bomb. In addition, student debt is crushing the generation, as well as underfunded pensions and a Social Security system that is clearly not sustainable. Second, there's a conflict over the system and how the system works and serves. The baby boom generation, generally, the system worked. Despite a couple financial crises, the post-World War II institutions, the two-party system, the post-Cold War, prosperity was felt. And for the most part, that group believes in market-based institutions and things generally held. Versus this up-and-coming generation has anxiety about the future. A majority have come of age since the global financial crisis and haven't experienced yet that prosperity. 49% of millennials surveyed say the global financial crisis changed the way they think about saving, investing, and spending. At the same time, this group is more connected, more fragmented, more diverse, and more technologically savvy and less defined by political labels than any generation in modern history. 48% of millennials classify themselves as political independents. 64% believe that the government should do more to solve today's problems. And yet, they increasingly feel the system is rigged and slanted toward the rich and connected. In addition, there's increasing demand that social outcomes, not just market outcomes, are worth balancing. In addition to this intergenerational conflict, we're seeing a clash between two worlds that we both live in, the fast world and the slow world. The fast world is defined by speed. Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, said it best in 2018. He said, "Things have never moved this fast, and going forward, things will never again move this slow." The fast world is all around us: artificial intelligence, robotics, gene editing, regenerative medicine, cryptocurrencies, and coming quantum computing speeds that are 100 million times faster than today's semiconductors. The slow world values truth and accuracy over speed. Examples of that slow world in which we live are federal government, three branches of government, checks and balances, our multilateral institutions like the UN and the EU, multi-party agreements like NAFTA, jury trials are slow and deliberate truth-finding mechanisms. The scientific process with peer review, double-blind studies, all are trying to get to accuracy at the expense of speed. These worlds are different in that they have differing views of disruption. In the fast world, disruption has positive connotations: creative destruction, efficiency, wealth creation. In the slow world, disruption has negative connotations relating to the perceived and maybe apparent loss of control. Usually, these worlds are far apart, but today they're clashing, and they're clashing without rules of engagement. In our news and politics, the fast world's goal of getting your message out and having it go viral, regardless of whether or not it's true, is apparent to all of us. In our financial systems, where blockchain and cryptocurrencies could disrupt established monetary control mechanisms. In our geopolitics, for example, where foreign state actors are able to use the slow world's forces of transparency and freedom of expression against itself. And in our national security, where the instruments of war are changing to those of automated drones and cyber warfare. Combatants need not be on the battlefield anymore. Yet there are no rules of engagement for this war. We are used to Geneva Conventions on the treatment of prisoners. We're used to treaties, for example, on the use of chemical weapons. But there's no Geneva Convention for artificial intelligence. How these worlds battle will define the planet over the coming decades. China and Russia view the old world as superior and the slow world as superior. There is no doubt who has control over the data and the networks. And the US, we're struggling for an answer. We love the internet, we love the convenience, we love all of the things that it has enabled until we actually experience how it can threaten us or invade our privacy or undermine established institutions. And the result is anxiety, regardless of the economy. And it's due to the realization that things that used to be axiomatic or givens that we were all raised with are somehow being called into question. What can we believe? First, our eyes. Did we really read that? Real versus unprofessional journalism or news generated by bot farms in far-off lands cause us to question what we read in the media. The majority of Americans today, the majority, don't view media as credible, any media. Second, are we really having to justify capitalism as the best way to allocate resources and lift all boats? For a post-World War II, post-Cold War generation that saw 2 billion people being lifted out of poverty, this seems nonsensical. Yet today, the framework itself is being challenged, even while places like Venezuela are imploding. Today, 51% of 18 to 29-year-olds have a favorable view towards socialism. Third, do we really worry? Do we have to worry about the fact that we're going to live in a democracy in the future? The Bush Institute's National 2018 Study on Democracy, done in conjunction with the Penn Biden Center and Freedom House, produced some worrisome results, finding that a majority in this country feel that our democracy is weak and getting weaker. 50% feel that, quote, there is a real danger of the U.S. becoming a non-democratic, authoritarian country. And then finally, are our institutional frameworks the right frameworks at all? The UN hasn't created peace among member nations. The WTO hasn't stopped trade wars. The EU hasn't prevented uneven economic growth. NATO doesn't stop Russian saber rattling, or Turkey, a member country, from working against our interests. And Congress, with its polarizing dysfunction, has a problem in tackling national priorities. Today, 13% of Americans approve of the work being done in Congress. But at a time when those institutions are their weakest, we may need them the most, ironically, as the declines in trust elsewhere are notable. So how do we get out of this situation? Principled leadership. That will lead us. Having a true north set of values is the common denominator in leading amidst unscripted moments. President Bush on 9/11 is the prime example. The last thing he could have imagined when he woke up that morning on September 11th was when he went to bed that night, the U.S. would have entered a war that continues to this day. But he led through it, defined by his character, with a consistent message that we will not tire, we will not falter, and we will not fail. Just as the U.S. Treasury bill is the risk-free rate against which all corporate bonds are priced, in many respects, the office of the President of the United States is the political risk-free rate against which all global actors gauge. If the risk of that office increases, global risks are amplified. Thank you, President Bush, for your constant reminder that the office of the presidency is more important than the occupant. Today, we must recognize that a leader's responsibility is to serve those being led, all of them. And our founding fathers highlighted that power is derived from the consent of the governed, and micromanaging a large population just isn't possible. In the future, new paradigms of leadership will be required. Leaders have moved from the task of managing through uncertainty to one of managing through the unknowable. Past patterns may no longer be predictive in a world where quantum computing power of 100 million times faster is able to answer a question before it is even asked. This world favors a compassionate, conservative philosophy, one that is fiscally conservative and socially tolerant. Why? Because it has to. The government's resources and capacity are limited. Markets, while not perfect, have been the greatest anti-poverty program ever. Focusing on expanding opportunity leads to more compassionate outcomes. And socially tolerant because it is right. We now serve a population less defined by labels, which is more fragmented, more connected, more skeptical of institutional arrangements than any in modern history, and it can vote with its feet very, very quickly. And this group will only tolerate the moral compass pointing towards the protection of human freedoms. That's the essence of compassionate conservatism, and that was in the message you saw in President Bush's words from 2002. He saw it early. Corporate compassion leadership doesn't start with government. It actually ends there. It starts at home, at our kitchen tables, on our sidewalks, and in our communities. In the end, our government reflects our values, so that hard work will not be wasted. As Jackie Robinson explained, life is not a spectator sport. If you're going to spend your whole life in the grandstand just watching what goes on, you're wasting your life. At the Bush Center, we are already there. Our portfolio is inspired by the values which guided President and Mrs. Bush in their public service: economic and political freedom, less government dependency, and a strong and compassionate country. Our mission is to apply those values as we engage communities in the U.S. and around the world by developing leaders, advancing policy, and taking action to address today's most pressing challenges. We see it as one of our integral parts of our mission to develop, recognize, and celebrate leadership. Our 4 leadership programs that we run here at the Bush Center are phenomenal. This week, we released our Leadership in Action report, measuring the results of our programs, available on our website at bushcenter.org. And I am so proud of our programs that they have achieved a Net Promoter Score of 92, which is almost unheard of for programs of this type. And 99% of our graduates reported that they are likely to realize their long-term visions thanks to our programming. This second annual Forum on Leadership continues that effort as well. We will highlight private and public sector leadership and explore disruptive technologies. We will learn from one of the most distinguished and experienced players in geopolitics that this country has ever seen. And we'll hear from graduates of 2 of our 4 leadership programs. And tonight, we will see local and global leadership in action. It's an exciting day made possible by the support of everyone here and the trust that President and Mrs. Bush has placed in our wonderful team to undertake programming that will both challenge and inspire. Thank you all for that, and thank you to our phenomenal board and our partners here at SMU. It is now my honor to kick things off with our first discussion on how compassionate conservatism plays out globally. Please join me in welcoming the Vice Chairman at Bank of America and member of the bank's executive management team, who is responsible for the bank's strategic positioning and is a tireless advocate for corporate responsibility. The bank recently made an investment in our work of $1 million here at the Bush Center as part of our Charge to Keep capital campaign to support our leadership programming, and for that we are grateful. She will offer her perspective and introduce our opening conversation. Please join me in welcoming the Vice Chairman of Bank of America, Ms. Anne Finucane.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Ken. I'm delighted to be here at the Bush Institute in celebration and in support of President and Mrs. Bush's mission and leadership in developing and recognizing leaders who are making a difference on the global stage. President Bush's focus on the military and our veterans, and Laura Bush's work with women in emerging democracies serve as an inspiration for all of us. Bank of America has supported the Bush Institute since 2011 because we share the vision of ensuring lasting positive change and empowerment, the power to make a difference. I'm joined here today by Jennifer Chandler, who is our market president in Dallas, so shout out to her if she's here somewhere. And we're particularly happy to partner on the Presidential Scholars Leadership Program, and proud to have one of the scholars, Mariz, with us here today. You'll have an opportunity to hear her inspiring story later in the program. Today's program is focused on the themes of compassionate leadership and what it means to be a responsible global citizen in today's world. These are themes that also guide us at Bank of America. It's a turbulent time, and our CEO, Brian Moynihan, and all of us understand it's our role and our responsibility to help address the biggest challenges facing society today, whether it's access to capital to women, a supportive and welcoming environment for returning veterans, access to clean water and sanitation, affordable housing, and creating greater economic opportunity for all of us. So today, it's my pleasure to introduce our first conversation that will explore this theme of what it means to be a responsible global citizen. And who better to participate in this conversation with President Bush than Dr. Robert Gates, who has served every US president with the exception of one, from LBJ through Barack Obama, who has also found time to be the president of Texas A&M and a best-selling author. He's the only Secretary of Defense in US history to be asked to remain in that office by a newly elected president. Dr. Gates personifies what it means to be a global citizen and a global problem solver. Moderating the conversation will be Paula Dobriansky, former Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs and former President Special Envoy to Northern Ireland. We could use her today. Over her career, Paula has tirelessly worked to advance international cooperation on the environment, energy, health, development, and humanitarian issues, a big mandate. Today, she is a much sought-after lecturer at both Harvard and Georgetown. So please join me in welcoming to the stage the 43rd President of the United States, George W. Bush, Dr. Gates, and Paula Dobriansky. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Ann, for that wonderful introduction. I have to tell you, I am really thrilled this morning to have this discussion with two leaders, patriots, who really have served our country with distinction, honor, courage of conviction, compassion, and integrity. And I have to say that not only did they serve our country in their formal capacities, but they continue to serve our country. So we have a lot of issues to go to and to discuss about leadership and about foreign policy and strategy. And I want to...
let me just say that after that introduction, we're thrilled you're the moderator.
Indeed, indeed.
Checks in the mail.
Yeah.
I want to go first to the issue of America's role in the world.
Okay.
And you know, but let me preface it, if I may, by saying, you know, it was Winston Churchill who delivered a very significant address up at Harvard in 1943. And in that address, he talked about America's role in the world. And he particularly said the following. He said, "The price of greatness is responsibility." President Bush, how do you see America's role in the world today?
Well, yeah, thank you. First of all, Gates is old enough to have been at the speech. And I'm proud to be on the stage with both you and Bob. Bob was, so you should judge a president by the company he keeps. And I had a fabulous cabinet, and Bob Gates was an integral part of the team. And I want to thank you for your continued service. So, America, we stand for human decency, human rights, the rule of law, free press, free religion. It's ingrained in our soul. And I think it's in our interest that others practice an open civil society for the sake of peace. One of the lessons of 9/11 is that how others live matters to our national security. A message that seems to be getting lost on the American people as that moment recedes in our collective memory. I believe it's in our national interest and self-interest that others live in free societies, and therefore America's role in the world it's got to be to hear the voices of those who are imprisoned, to hear those that scream for religious freedom, those that want there to be a vibrant press, to hold the powerful to account. And if we're not willing to listen and engage, then it's unlikely that others will embrace the habits necessary for peaceful societies.
Thank you. Your freedom agenda certainly underscores that, both when you were president and now here at the Bush Center.
Yeah, you're right.
I like that answer. Secretary Gates, how do you see it?
Well, very similarly, the way I would put it is I'm very much American exceptionalist. I realize that's old-fashioned, but I believe that Lincoln was right when he said that we are Earth's last best hope. And in a time of rising authoritarianism, to borrow from Isaiah, I think it's important that America be a light unto the nations. As the defender of human rights, democracy, liberty, and human dignity, there's nobody else left. It's just us. And if we don't stand for those ideals, and we're deeply flawed, we have a lot of flaws, but the world has always looked to America for this kind of leadership despite those faults, because we're unique, I think, in that we're always trying to overcome them and work at them. On a more practical level, I think the United States is the only significant force in the world for an international rules-based order where it isn't dog eat dog and every nation out for itself, but trying to figure out how we get along, how we work together to address a variety of problems. And if the United States doesn't lead, there is no one else to lead. If you look at other democracies, and some of them, like our best friends, the British, are in even more trouble than we are. So I think that we have a unique role in the world, and as the President said, it's in our own interest to play that role in the world. Just one final historical thought. The notion that we can seal ourselves off from this responsibility, I think, is very naive. I mean, who would have thought that the assassination of some Austrian Archduke in 1914 would have an effect on us, or the German seizure of a little piece of land from Czechoslovakia in 1938, or a bunch of ragtag terrorists living in Afghanistan in 2001. So the notion that we can ignore the rest of the world and just do our own thing, I think, is downright ignorant.
Yeah, can I tell one story? So on September the 12th, 2001, Koizumi calls me. He was the Japanese prime minister, and he said, the United States and Japan will stand shoulder to shoulder to enhance our mutual security, and we will work to spread freedom as the alternative to the ideology of the murderers. It was a remarkable conversation because 60 years prior to that, my dad chooses not to go to college, but to go to fight the Japanese. And she got asked what happened. I bet in the late 40s, if somebody said, one day Japan and the United States will stand shoulder to shoulder to enhance our mutual security, they would have said, you're a hopeless, idealistic person, naive. And yet it happened. And one reason it happened is because there's a universality to freedom. People want to be free. It doesn't matter whether you're a Methodist or a Muslim. They want to be free. And the Japanese adopts a Japanese-style democracy. And an enemy became an ally for the sake of peace. And the question Americans must ask themselves, can it happen again? It's happened throughout history. Can it happen again? And I believe our collective answer is absolutely, unless the United States says it's none of our business how others live.
Let's talk about Iraq.
Okay.
President Bush, you know.
Thank you.
Oh, this is significant. In your book, Decision Points, you said that the most important part of your job as president was making decisions, and chapter 12 was on the surge. That truly was a difficult decision, but it was a wise decision. It certainly was a decision not to pull out troops out of Iraq, but instead to enhance it.
That's right.
Explain it.
Because I thought we could achieve the goal of a functioning democracy in the Middle East and an ally in the war against terror. And I had great faith in our military to help us achieve that goal. And I felt that a withdrawal during a difficult period of time in Iraq would have emboldened an enemy that still was a threat, in my judgment, to our homeland, and would have dispirited our military, particularly the families. In other words, it would have looked like the initial decision was a pure political decision, and that would have been a political decision. But I couldn't stomach the idea of people saying, well, George W. is trying to save his own political skin by making a strategic decision that would have weakened our standing in the Middle East and weakened the faith in others that we stood for free societies. Remember, the Iraqis had voted for a new constitution and had voted for a government. And it worked. And one reason it worked is because the Secretary of Defense, Gates, helped make it work. And so Bob came on right as the surge hadn't even been announced. And I remember meeting with you in Crawford, and he slid over from Texas A&M. He was running the mighty A&M university, and we talked about the surge, and he was committed to making sure that America did not retreat from the battlefield again. And yeah, thank you for, yeah, it was the right decision, and it worked.
Well, it was a significant part of your book and also
yeah,
your presidency.
A chapter.
Secretary Gates, you implemented it. Tell us about the trials
Well, first
and
of all,
tribulations.
it was not only a wise decision, it was a courageous decision, because what perhaps a lot of people don't know is most of the senior military didn't agree. There were a handful who did, but most of the most people did not think it was a good idea. Just a few points about the surge. First of all, I remember the president saying, you know, we're going to need a new commander. And he said, you might want to take a look at this General Petraeus. And my mom didn't raise an idiot. I looked at General Petraeus, and I ran a few traps, and I came back to the president, and I said, gee, Mr. President, I think David Petraeus would be exactly the right guy for this job. So the president approved 6 brigades going in. So that was about 20,000 troops. And a few days after he'd made that decision and authorized it, senior military leaders came in to me and said, we really made a kind of a serious mistake. We forgot about the enablers. I'd never heard this word before, the enablers. Well, it's the helicopters, it's the medevac, it's the logistics, it's the field hospitals, it's all that stuff. So all of a sudden, a surge of 20,000 became 30,000. Now, just to give you a little flavor in terms of cost, on average, for every 1,000 soldiers you send overseas, it costs $1 billion. Okay? So I'm just going back to him, telling him the cost of this thing, both in men and money, is going to be about 50% higher than originally. So I told the military, I said, okay, I will take my head in my hands and go tell the president what we need to do, but don't you ever do that again. Don't ever forget about the enablers. The second problem was finding enough troops, and this was the hardest decision I think I made as secretary, because the Army came to me and said, we don't have enough troops with the current deployment rates that we have. So we're either going to have to cut soldiers' time at home, or we're going to have to extend their tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. So instead of a year, it would be 15 months. And a young major working for me said, you need to understand, sir, you're breaking the rule of 2s, because now these soldiers are going to miss 2 birthdays, 2 anniversaries, 2 Christmases, 2 Thanksgivings, and so on. And it was the hardest decision because I knew how hard this was going to be on the troops and their families. The final point that I would make is that the Democrats in Congress were dead set against the surge, and having just taken control of the Congress, devoted every waking hour to make us reverse it as fast as possible. And so all through the first 6 or 7 months of 2007, we were fighting a constant rearguard action to prevent the Congress from making us bring the troops home before most of them had even gotten there. And during the spring, after consulting with the president, I told Petraeus, and then made it public, that I had asked for a report on progress in September, because I felt like if we got to summer, then I could tell it was important for us to hold the Republicans, especially in the Senate. And if we could get to summer, I could then tell those Republican senators, oh, for heaven's sake, at least give us until September. It's only 8-10 weeks from now, to see whether this thing is working. And the good news was we already had signs by May the surge was working, and that it was having the effect that we had hoped. But it was a tough slog all the way. And as I say, put a huge burden on our troops and their families. But we also had a battlefield in Iraq, but we also had a battlefield in Washington.
Yeah, that's right. One thing I'd like to note is one of the reasons why ultimately the Pentagon agreed was because Pete Pace did a fabulous job of shepherding the military. I know Pete's here. He was the first chairman of the Joint Chiefs from the Marine Corps. No wonder we were successful.
And he was my tutor. He taught me a lot in the first,
Pete was awesome.
First time I was secretary.
Yeah, by the way, he's now on the board of the Bush Institute. Yeah.
Well, your leadership on that issue, respectively, both of you, is truly exemplary. Another area where your leadership was also exemplary was certainly with regard to Afghanistan. Both of you were very vested in Afghanistan and ensuring that al-Qaeda's safe haven was not only obliterated, but you worked to ensure that it wouldn't come back. Talk about some of the profound decisions you had to make in that regard.
Well, the first decision was after 9/11, I recognized this was a different kind of conflict as opposed to previous ideological conflicts where there was a capital and a standing army and an air force and spies. We were dealing with an enemy that could only thrive if they found the soft underbelly of failed states. Therefore, part of the doctrine had to be, in order to protect the homeland, if you harbor a terrorist, you're equally as guilty as the terrorists. And in this case, the Taliban was harboring al-Qaeda. And we gave them a chance to turn them in, but they wouldn't do it. And so when the president says something, he's got to mean it, and I meant it. And so the initial objective was to destroy al-Qaeda and its safe haven. And we did, thanks to not only the military, but the CIA. And it was an extraordinary effort. The interesting thing is, I recall, is Tommy Franks had trouble getting the troops in, and the American people started getting real anxious about, when are you going to do something? When are you going to do something? But there was like a fog in Uzbekistan, and it prevented the helicopters from flying, and then there was something, and this and that. But once we finally got going, the mission was partially accomplished. Then the question is, what is the role of the United States? Look, again, I understand Americans are tired and they're becoming isolationists. And so what I tell people is, if you want Afghan girls to suffer like they did prior to the liberation of the country, then convince the Congress to and the president to withdraw the troops. In my judgment, it would be not in our national interest to do that, particularly since we're a nation that believes in human dignity and human rights.
Absolutely. Mr. Secretary?
Well, most of the tough decisions that I had to make about Afghanistan, frankly, were in the Obama administration. We did have a problem when I first became secretary. The Taliban had fled to Pakistan and had used the years since we had ejected them to regroup and rearm with the help of the Pakistanis, and they really came back to try and change the events of 2001. We first saw that really in 2005, but by 2007 they were coming back pretty strong. So we tried to find more forces that we could, I just described how scarce combat forces were, but we found a couple of more brigades that we could put in 2007 to try and deal with this recurring Taliban threat. The two toughest decisions I had to make first in 2009 was the decision to relieve the commander in Afghanistan. He was a fine general. He'd had a great career, but he was not the right fit for the kind of war we were fighting in Afghanistan, and that's a very tough decision. It was also the first field commander that had been relieved since Truman fired MacArthur in the early 1950s. The second was persuading the president that we frankly, at the end of 2009, needed a surge in Afghanistan, similar to the surge that we had had in Iraq. The commander had asked for 40,000, Stan McChrystal had asked for 40,000 troops. And we debated this for 3 months in the Situation Room, and we finally got an agreement. The president agreed to send 30,000 additional troops, and then we put the arm on our allies for another 7,000 or 8,000. So we came very close to what the commander had asked for. Unfortunately, the benefits, and they did have significant benefits because these additional forces were able to clear out both Helmand and Kandahar provinces pretty well. But we were kind of fighting with one arm tied behind us because the president also had put a deadline for when we were going to leave. And one of the things that President Bush and Condi Rice and I all felt very strongly about, particularly in the time of the surge in Iraq was no deadlines in terms of when we would begin to end the surge or when we would come out of Iraq. Because you basically then just tell the enemy, all you have to do is wait us out. And that was part of the problem, I think, in 2009, is when a firm date was established for pulling the troops out, it basically sent the message to the Taliban that no matter how much we suffer over the next few years, we got this thing. If we can just hang in there, we've got this thing.
What about the ongoing negotiations with the Taliban that are taking now? Do you have a view on that?
We know the guy who's negotiating on behalf of the U.S., Zal Khalilzad, who is, close to my administration. He's a good guy. Bob and I were chuckling because the Afghans are constantly accusing Zal of wanting to be the president of Afghanistan, which is not like the best position in the world for Zal to be aiming for. But Bob knows a lot more about it than I do. All I know is Afghanistan's got a democratically elected government that at some point in time need to be a part of any process in order for it to work.
Yeah, I would say that it's really, I mean, I think Zal is a very good negotiator. He was a very good ambassador. He knows the Afghans well. He's Afghan himself. And which is why they worry he wants to run for president. Although how anyone would think that was a career-enhancing move, I'm not quite sure. But I think that the key here is really sequencing. I don't have any issues with trying to sort out the main issues between the U.S. and the Taliban as the first step. But as any part of a negotiated outcome, the Afghan government is going to have to be a part of the process. And if we can get some basic issues sorted out between the U.S. and the Taliban, and then bring the Afghan government into those conversations, because at the end of the day, we can't walk away from those people, and they have to be part of the solution. We can't just do this over their heads and pretend that it's going to have any good impact long term.
Yeah, the other point I want to make about both countries is that it's just not the United States who's there. There was like 32 nations in the coalition of the willing in Afghanistan, I think 34 in Iraq. In other words, NATO is very proud of its decision to join with us in Afghanistan. And so there are other nations there. And we ought to be grateful as a nation that they're willing to do that.
Mr. President, this one is just for you on Afghanistan. I have to ask this. I have to put this forward.
Okay, well, go ahead.
And that is that First Lady Laura Bush made history during your administration when she delivered that weekly radio address on Afghanistan, which was the first time ever that a First Lady had done so. Yeah. And she said on that radio address, the fight against terrorism is also a fight for the rights and dignity of women. She made 3 trips there. She's the honorary chair of the U.S. Afghan Women's Council. I mean, she's been committed to this. And this is about global citizenship. Isn't this a perfect example of that?
Yeah, it is. Well, I was trying to give a radio address. I'm sitting there all poised to speak, and I felt this sharp elbow in my side. Move over, Buster. And, no, it was, I think it was, Laura knew she could be impactful as the First Lady, and she learned firsthand how impactful she could be. Because after her speech, a lot of people wanted to be engaged in helping Afghan women and Afghan girls, and she gave great hope to people whose rights had been squashed by the Taliban. And it was a defining moment in helping to define how our administration would treat people around the world. And yeah, it was a good one.
Well, and she certainly has made a tremendous difference, not only then, but even now.
Yeah, she's still telling me what to do.
That may be a good thing.
Yeah, probably
Should I
is.
say?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyhow, Russia. We have to discuss Russia. Mr. President, I was struck by the fact that you've met Vladimir Putin more than 40 times during your administration. Who is he? What are his goals and objectives? Tell us.
We became so familiar with each other, I called him Vlad and he called me W. He changed when I was president. When I first got elected, Russia was broke, then the price of oil goes up, and the real Putin starts to emerge. I think Putin main goal is to reinstate Soviet hegemony, Soviet glory. He's playing a pretty weak hand right now because the demographics of Russia are disastrous. He has consolidated power. He is not much pushback. You know, people say, man, he's popular. And I said, yeah, I'd have been popular if we owned NBC News too. Anyway, he is zero-sum thinker. He's not a very good strategic thinker. Strategic thinkers think, what can we both do together to win? He thinks, what can I do to diminish America? Bob, I think I'm right about saying this, Bob, is that an old playbook out of the Soviet era was to try to foment dissent in our democracy by funding radical groups and create consternation in our society. For a period of time, the Soviet playbook was closed, and all of a sudden it seems to be reemerging. And we've got to make two things abundantly clear. One, our alliances are solid. I mean, imagine being a Lithuanian and worried about the U.S. engagement through NATO in protecting them through Article 5, and yet there's a lot of Russian speakers in Lithuania. And so our allies are being pressured by Putin, and they've got to know they've got a strong ally in the United States. And secondly, Putin's got to know he can't mess with our elections, that any attempt to dispirit the United States democracy, there's got to be significant pushback. And there needs to be a firm resolve by any administration to make it clear to Putin that we understand your game and you're not going to get away with it.
Mr. Secretary, by the way, before you give your response, I have to say you've done extensive academic work, Russian history, and looking at Soviet foreign policy. I've been a reader of many of your writings, both outside and then also when you served at the agency.
Wow.
So give us yours. No,
is that a sleeping device?
No comment.
It's the non-technical cure for apnea. I think to understand where Putin is coming from, you have to go back to the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I think we in the West greatly underestimated the magnitude of the humiliation, because it wasn't just the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. It was the collapse of a 4-century-old Russian empire. And so Russia's borders today, just kind of wrap your head around this, Russia's borders today are what they were before Catherine the Great became empress in the 18th century. Moscow used to rule 300 million people. Now it's 140 million. And declining. And then you had, during the 90s, a period of extraordinary destitution and chaos, disorder, criminal activity, murders in the streets, gangs killing each other, businessmen killing each other, and so on. So this, first of all, fed the need, which is, frankly, I think, part of the Russian culture, for a strong leader, to restore order, to restore the economy, and so on. I think, and that's the backdrop against which Putin became president. I think he, from the very beginning, has had two basic goals. The first, as the president said, is to restore Russia to the Soviet Union's place as a great power, and a power that has to be taken into account in dealing with any problems around the world. And I think their involvement in Syria, their involvement in Venezuela, their involvement in Africa, this is all basically a reassertion, we're back and don't mess with us, and you got to take us into account. The second is a strategy as old as the Russian Empire, and that is to create a buffer of either client states or frozen conflicts on their periphery. And we saw that in Georgia, we saw it in Ukraine, we've seen it in Moldova, and Transnistria. Frankly, I think if the Baltic states were not members of NATO, we would be seeing it, as the President suggested with Lithuania, I think we'd be seeing it in the Baltic states today. I think since the election of 2012, in which he felt or believed that the U.S. intervened against him when he was reelected president, And he regards anything that we were doing in terms of promotion of democracy, of civil society and so on, which was going on, began really during the Bush administration, as interference in their internal affairs. And so I think this newest piece is basically retaliation and the determination to weaken the West in every way possible through fomenting internal divisions, and not just in the United States, but in Europe as well. And we've seen it in Germany, in France, in Italy. They were involved, I think, originally in the Brexit vote. And to the president's point about the Soviet playbook, the problem today is the technologies that are available through social media and the internet and cyber and so on are dramatically more effective than the tools that were available to CIA and the KGB back in the Cold War. And Putin is using all of these against us to try and foment divisions among us, to interfere with the outcome of our elections and so on. So, and I think we're going to be dealing with him for a very long time. His current term is not up until 2024. I think he will find a way to become, like President Xi, president for life.
It's one of the most serious challenges we have before us, certainly. Last month, there were 49 immigrants who were sworn in as U.S. citizens here at the Bush Center, and you and Mrs. Bush made remarks about the significant contributions of immigrants to our society. But you know, at the same time, you also noted that the center is very clear-eyed about the need to enforce our borders and protect our homeland. Talk about this issue.
Well, first of all, if you've never been to a naturalization ceremony, I urge you to go to one. They are spectacular moments of the greatness of America. People have taken big risks to come here, people who've started their own businesses, people who want their kids to be able to get a good education, and they've stood in line and they've become citizens, and it is a spectacular moment. We had one, we've had two. The first one, I still had a little bit of the presidency in me and knew the photograph that would be broadcast across the country. So I had two Mexican-American in Marine uniforms who had just gotten sworn in on my sides. And I was sending a message to the American people that there's a pretty harsh debate right now, but please don't overlook the contributions of immigrants to the vibrancy of our soul. And so, yeah, it is nothing's going to get solved until the politics gets out of it. To me, it's viewed as a political plus for both parties in Congress. And it's sad because the problem's fixable. The laws need to be rewritten. The asylum laws need to be reinvestigated. The Border Patrol needs to be bolstered. And most Americans understand the need to enforce the border, but most Americans are more welcoming than the rhetoric has been thus far. And so, yeah, I'm a little discouraged about it. As you know, I heroically tried and miserably failed to get a bill passed in 2007. I still think it's the right model. I know there's not only a human rights dimension to this issue, but there's an economic dimension to this issue. And I think those of us who live in, or anywhere for that matter, know that many jobs that require hard work and, sweating away in August in Texas, Americans won't want to do them, but there are others who will. And so for the economic vitality of our country, we ought to have a rational worker program. And anyway, it's a tough issue, and it's, it really kind of, it clouds what's been so great about us as a nation, that we're able to assimilate. And I hope that the issue is just political, not a lack of confidence in what we stand for, and the ability of people to meld together.
Secretary Gates, what's the proper role of the military in this issue?
Well, I think that if first of all, when I became secretary, we had several thousand National Guard troops along the border. I actually was kind of cynical about it and had these discussions with President Bush. these troops were there at the request of the governors, and the reason they wanted the federal government involved was frankly because then we pay for those troops being on the border rather than the governors having to find the money to pay for them. I think that the military can provide short-term assistance where there are civilian shortfalls, whether it's in reconnaissance or logistics, things like that. But I think it should be considered short-term. It is not the mission of the American military to be on the border, to guard our borders. That's why we have the Customs and Border Patrol. And so where the military is filling a role, we ought to be strengthening the civilian agencies that are responsible for this long-term. So I think if the military is needed, I think that they have to play that limited role. They can't do law enforcement. They can't arrest people. In most cases, they don't even carry weapons. And so this is really about providing some kinds of support to fulfill short-term civilian deficiencies in capability. But it takes them away from their training. It takes them away from getting ready for the missions that they're actually supposed to be prepared to fight. So I see it as a short-term fix, not as a long-term role. That's not what the American military is supposed to do.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And by the way, we don't want to militarize our border, and we don't want to send a signal to Mexico that they're an enemy. Mexico is not an enemy. They're an ally. And anyway, fine answer, Secretary.
Another area that both of you have spent time on, China. China's cast as a strategic competitor. It's also been condemned for its predatory commercial behavior on behalf of both Republicans and Democrats, and there's been a call for strong action against China. What's the right balance for dealing with China?
Well, I think you just described it. On the one hand, there are benefits to trade. On the other hand, that China needs to be held account when they steal intellectual property, and hopefully the negotiations that are going on will achieve this objective. What's changed since I was there and Bob was there is Xi Jinping. They used to have a standing committee would make the decisions, so there'd be 7 people that required consensus amongst the 7, which was kind of a check and balance in an unusual way. And therefore, China seemed to be a lot risk-adverse at being confrontational. And then Xi Jinping, maybe president for life, has consolidated power, which changes the decision-making dynamic and changes the diplomacy. I believe the United States, though, must make sure that our allies, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and India, know that we stand squarely with them if China tries to encroach upon their territories. I happen to believe that not joining the Trade-Pacific, whatever it's called, trading partnership, something like that, was a mistake, because by pulling out of it, it sent a signal to our allies that we weren't serious about economic alliances, and that it also enabled China to gain a better market share from our allies relative to what we had. And so, you know, the best policy ought to be to negotiate the best deal we can get and negotiate trade disputes through world mechanisms and strengthen our bilateral alliances.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a reaction?
So really just to pile on to the president's comments about the role of Xi Jinping. The creator of Chinese reform, Deng Xiaoping, had an expression, hide your capabilities, bide your time. It's basically lie low while you're getting stronger. And he also, the second pillar of his approach was to prevent the rise of another Mao ever again. And so the structures that he created, term limits for the president, age limits for the members of the Standing Politburo and others, were intended to prevent that from happening. And it was sustained up until Xi came along. In the first case, what Xi has done is kind of basically go out there and say, hey, we've got an alternative model of governance and of the way countries ought to be organized, and our authoritarian state capitalism is the way to go. And you see these democracies are all paralyzed and can't get anything done, but look at us. And so he goes out and he brags about what they're going to do in technologies in 2025 and China 2050 and asserting China's military role in the South China Sea and things like that, that have frankly alarmed almost everybody. And the second piece of it was getting rid of all of those limits that Deng put in terms of leadership, making himself president for life. This basically destroys the notion of collective leadership, and frankly, it means he's totally responsible for everything that happens, in addition to having all the authority. But the problem with that is there's nobody going to come up to him and say, you're headed down the wrong path. You're making a mistake. And when a leader doesn't have anybody whispering in his ear, this is a mistake, or this is the wrong thing to do. And this was one of the safeguards of the collective leadership approach to decision making. It didn't stop the reform from going on, but it made sure that things were held in check, if you will. So I think what has happened and what's changed since we were in government is that you now have the business community as well as other countries, the business community in this country as in other countries, all increasingly concerned about China's approach and frankly, a new attitude toward China after 40 years. And the key, I think, for us and for our leadership is figuring out, I think we have a long-term competition with China ahead of us. In many respects, it will resemble the Cold War. But we have to make sure to try and channel it into competition and avoid becoming adversaries, and with the risk of military confrontation. And that's going to take some pretty adroit leadership, both in Beijing and in Washington.
I've got 2 points.
Okay.
One, that's the reason why it's important for Canada and Mexico and the United States to find common ground to bolster our respective economies so that we can better compete with China in the long term. And secondly, China has got enormous demographic difficulties as well. Remember, they had the one-child policy. Well, it turns out that most families that had one child wanted it to be a male. And so you've got an aging population, a declining population, and a lot of men, and very few women, relatively speaking. And so I don't think China's to be feared, because I believe our future is much brighter than theirs. But I do believe, as Bob said, that we can exploit, wisely exploit the consternation that's now rising around the world of China's aggressive policy.
We're at the end of our session, but I want to stick in a fast one because there's breaking news about the arrest of Julian Assange. Can you give a quick reaction?
Yeah,
Do either of you have a quick reaction to that?
2 words, about time.
Yeah, I don't have any sympathy for the guy either.
All right, I thought it would be a quick reaction, so I felt safe. And Eleanor Roosevelt
Snowden's next.
Yeah.
I wanted to close by saying, Eleanor Roosevelt said, "He who is not courageous enough to take risks will accomplish nothing in life." Clearly, the 2 of you have taken a lot of risks in the positions in which you've held, but these risks have really benefited the lives of so many. Please join me in thanking both the President and Secretary Gates. To the video screen. Thank you.
Mount Kilimanjaro is the highest freestanding mountain in the world. It's the height of 13 Empire State Buildings, and I'm going to climb it. My name is Mariz. I live in Egypt. I love anything related to physical activities. It's what I'm good at and my passion. But it's not common for women to be athletes in Egypt, and I wanted to change that and take a stand. Climbing Kilimanjaro has always been a dream to me, but it's more than just climbing a mountain. It's a statement to make a difference.
Some of the things that we do advise people to just be aware of is that you should expect to get a headache, feel a bit nauseous, lose your appetite, you might feel a bit dizzy, but that is okay.
So beautiful and green. It's kind of scary, we're nervous, we're excited, and we cannot wait to see how it's like. In my home country, women are labeled. We have a lot of misconceptions. I wanted to make some noise about that. Having my passion as sports and running, it opened a lot of doors that I never expected. In running, if you push yourself, you're gonna reach the finish line anyway. But in the mountain, if you pushed yourself, you could risk your life. The mountain is the one that decides either you're gonna make it or not. It's day 5. It's the summit night. The guide gathered us and he was like, okay guys, this is the most dangerous part. At any point, if I tell anyone that you have to go down now, you have to go immediately. I was as if I was waiting for him to look at me and tell me, okay, now you have to go down because you're almost dying. I thought to my mind that I didn't come that far to go back. And then I made it. My message is for everyone who has felt pushed to the edge. We can no longer turn a blind eye to the hardships that individuals endure, whether women, minorities, the displaced, or disabled. No matter how high the mountain is, or no matter how hard the situation is, they can conquer that mountain in life. Believe me, if you give people the opportunity to be successful, they will. So, what dream will you dare to overcome?
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Business Development Advisor for Medmark Insurance Brokerage Egypt and a 2013 George W. Bush Institute We Lead Scholar, Mariz.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm so honored to be back. 6 years ago on this stage, right before I left Dallas, I said, I have been transformed from being a dreamer to an achiever. If you allow me, I'm here today to share with you this journey of transformation. My time during the Women's Initiative was an eye-opener, helping me in 3 crucial areas. Exposure. I always say that without the Women's Initiative experience, I wouldn't have been able to do my current job, where I have to meet hundreds of clients. The program was essential in exposing us to key people from different backgrounds and in places of influence. Most of them were the top management of the most famous corporations in the US. The very fact that we had dinner hosted in the President of the United States place is not an everyday type of experience. And to that, of course, I'm very grateful. Networking, closely related to the idea of exposure. For the first time, I understood the concept of networking and how crucial it is to every area of life, be it the professional world, athletic world, or even daily interactions. I must say that I returned from the program with a totally different mindset than when I first walked in. I got to meet people coming from all walks of society and doing so many different things that I never even knew existed. And now I call them friends that I cherish and learn from. I must say that before the program, I was a very shy person. And it was difficult for me to network with people I've never met before. But thanks to the program, and in particular my role model, Charity, who never gave up on me, I learned how to effectively network with all kinds of people to the extent that people never believed that I was ever a shy person, which take us to the next level, and this is courage. The program did not only give me the courage to network and meet new people, but more importantly, the courage to pursue my dreams and to explore new places in life, I'm now able to go to places that I never thought possible. The program gave me a push to stretch my own limits in all life aspects, starting with running a 5K, to 10K, to many half marathons, and now I can go to a full marathon. But that wasn't enough. With sports as my passion, I have always wished to scale it and spread it in my own country. But it wasn't typical for women to practice sports publicly, with lots of taboos and stereotyping associated. So I teamed up with other passionate athletes, founding Cairo Runners, a committee that lead our nation to a big change in the mindset, availing sports, specifically running, for all classes, backgrounds, and ages. We started in 2012 with a tiny vision and number of runners, hesitantly running for the first time in our streets, having a dream that one day we have our own world-class Cairo Marathon in the heart of the city, which seemed impossible with all the obstacles we had back then. Seeing it happen, having over 6,000 runners taking over downtown Cairo after a long journey of trials, failures, more failures, and finally a big success. Today you can see youth, girls, and women running day and night confidently in the streets of Cairo, in neighborhoods where we avoided walking around before. The program allowed me to think beyond my own dream to a bigger vision that I can plan and accomplish. It allowed me to be a trendsetter rather than being a dreamer. The impact of my own transformation continued when I started being called for motivational speeches or youth coaching. One of my precious experiences was being invited as one of 4 main social influencers in Egypt to be a lead trainer at Elisa Sednawi Foundation, a place for creative learning, delivering mind and body workshop for children in Upper Egypt. Once you believe you are a go-getter, not only a dreamer, nothing stops you. Shortly, another long-awaited dream was due, which was reaching the top of Africa, climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. It started off as a far-fetched dream and ended up as one invaluable experience, whipping off the word impossible from my dictionary. It takes courage, persistence, vision, action plans, and networking to be able to achieve our dreams. And that's exactly what happened to me. I can say that I gained a voice, I gained a new life. Whenever people think that I'm an extraordinary person, I answer them that I'm a regular person who was gifted an extraordinary opportunity of courage, exposure, and networking. Your support and investment in this program change lives and impact nations on so many levels. I'm forever grateful for the Bush Institute. Keep changing people's lives. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the director of the George W. Bush Institute SMU Economic Growth Initiative, Laura Collins.
Good morning. The Bush Institute SMU Economic Growth Initiative advances policies that promote domestic economic growth and strengthen our role in the global economy. Our programs examine the role of trade and globalization in strengthening us globally, and we believe immigration makes us a stronger domestic economy. We're working with Central Americans to help them enhance their own economic opportunity at home, and we're developing a program that will examine policies to further strengthen our domestic economy. Our work often focuses on what the public sector should or should not do, but today we're going to talk about how the private sector can take the lead in struggling communities. One such leader is Dan Gilbert. Dan is the founder and chairman of Detroit-based Quicken Loans and Rock Ventures. He believes that for a company to be great, it must do good. This philosophy for more than profit motivated him to move his businesses from the suburbs to downtown Detroit. Nearly a decade has passed since that move. He has invested billions of dollars in Detroit and has reignited the heart of the city. Please join me in welcoming Dan Gilbert. Thank you for being here with us today.
Oh, great to be in Texas. It's been a while.
Yeah?
It's always fun when you land here.
Yes. I want to get to what work you've done in Detroit, but first, I want to talk about what For More Than Profit means and where that philosophy comes from for you.
Well, For More Than Profit is sort of made-up brand that we put together in the last maybe year or 18 months. And so you have, for-profits, you have non-for-profits. And I think, unfortunately, from Hollywood and certain businesses and certain political circles, the people get slotted and organizations get slotted. Either you're good or you're bad type of thing, and it's unfortunate because there's a lot of good that's being done in the private sector. And so we thought that maybe, based on what we've done in the past and how we look at things, to come up with a term that maybe communicated it better. And the term is For More Than Profit. So we're what we call ourselves anyway, a For More Than Profit. And that doesn't mean, and this is the thing you gotta watch out, because the boards of public companies and CEOs, they go, what do you mean, for more than, so it actually means more profits as well. And the concept there is that you have a talent attraction because of a mission. And let's face it today, I know it's a little bit cliche to say all this, but it really is the sort of the calling card of every CEO in America, talent, talent, talent. Mm-hmm. And today's talent, I think it's pretty much in every survey and every observable metric, they want to be part of something that is helpful, not just to the profits of the company, which is fine, but to the community in some kind of mission base. And our mission was Detroit, and it fit in perfect, and I think that it feeds in each other. And I think, I don't know mathematically if we can prove it, although I'd like to hire a university to go do some kind of study, but I believe that we are actually literally more profitable on a P&L standpoint because we have a mission above and beyond our profits attracting the best and brightest to Detroit.
Has this been a philosophy that has been with you from the beginning? You're a serial entrepreneur. You started businesses basically your whole life. Mm-hmm. Have you thought this from the beginning, or is this something that developed for you over time?
I didn't think exactly of this thing till we got downtown to Detroit and started really viewing the world through a different lens, a little bit of a different lens. I'm a fourth-generation Detroiter. My kids are fifth. We're like Detroit farmers, as I like to say. And I used to kid people, going west was going to East Lansing. That was going, Mom, I'm going to East Lansing. You're going that far west. And so I mean, it's something, though, that, when I watch some of the media and the movies, and, there's always this depiction of the, greedy, evil corporations and crazy. But, yeah, there's a handful of those in the world, in our country, but most of them, I think, are run by good people. People have noble purposes, and I think they do impact things positively. So we were saying, how can we package this and then also maybe step it up so companies could see that it's not just great for the community, which could be in itself a reason, but it literally, in today's world, it's like this opening almost. Like in today's world, it's going to make your company better too. And that really hit it for us in the last 5-6 years.
So this move to downtown, talk to me about the process you had for making the decision. You were based in the suburbs, you'd been there a while. Things are obviously going well for you at this point. Why make the move to downtown? Well,
there's a couple of reasons. I mean, number one, it's sort of what I was saying earlier. There's this sort of philanthropic part of it or altruistic part of it, and then there's a sort of capitalistic reason. So I'll give you the first one on the philanthropic side. So we're from Detroit, our families, I just told you, and most of my friends were and all that. And you heard for years, you probably had to be about 6, 7 years, 8 years older than me to have a memory of what all of us heard growing up there from our parents, our grandparents, our aunts, our uncles, the Detroit that they remember. And they just talked about it with like passion and heart. And people who were in the city talked about it that way, and people in the suburbs talked about it that way. And let's face it, 50 to 60 year decline in a major American city, it was a well-deserved reputation. Yeah. I mean, I never try to tell people or sugarcoat it saying, it was exaggerated and this and that. It wasn't exaggerated. It was deserved for many reasons. We could stay here probably and teach a course about it for hours or 20 hours or 50 hours, whatever it might be, because it's deep and it's detailed and there's a lot of reasons. But, now it was time to go out and to say, how can we impact it? And I felt we had enough employees or team members, as we call them, and, how can we get everybody involved? If we're going to move downtown to Detroit, because we're in the suburbs, our leases were coming due, it was, all right, I'm not going to go down there and where everybody's going to drive in, go to a garage, 6 o'clock, get back in their car, drive to the suburbs. We might as well stay in the suburbs, right? So we have to have this, like, let's impact as much as we can. Now, we had no idea sort of the opportunities to do that and how they were going to happen and all that, but yeah, philosophically from when we moved, that was the thought process, without a name and without knowing how much.
Yeah, great. Talk about what you've accomplished so far downtown, because I think we all, as you mentioned, we all know the struggles Detroit has had. There are iconic images, we understand the blight, the removal, population loss from the heart of the city. What have you been able to accomplish simply with that first move in the decade since?
First of all, there's a name that we say in Detroit. I don't hear this name much anymore because you were talking about the symbols of decay. And I'm not sure that name got out to here, but it was, we used to call it ruin porn, like R-U-I-N porn. That's how, because people would come from all over the world literally and take pictures of these ruins and then, you know, and put them, now most of that's pretty much gone, okay? Yeah. Including Ford Motor Company, which just committed to the train station, which was one of the big symbols of decay, which was just a fantastic thing. And
it's a beautiful building. I mean,
beautiful. It's like Grand Central Station, New York. And you know, that was a symbol. So having Ford, you know, coming up and committing, that was just a beautiful thing to see. But I would say, you know, for us, the most important thing is that we prove to everybody that it's safe, which it is, and that, you know, that we would be able to, through many mechanisms, and you can go through, there's employment, which was an issue, with jobs, blight, which I chaired the blight task force, and the mayor's done a great job with that. There's the, you know, safety, which, you know, you could probably put that in the #1 position. Then, of course, there's education, which is the last one. But all 4 of those are going in the right direction right now.
So of those 4, some of those are things that we typically think the public sector has a role in shaping. How have you in the private sector, have you taken on any of these roles in sort of helping the city get on its feet by taking some of those roles, at least temporarily, before the city government can take them on full?
It's a great question, and there's nothing like the largest municipal bankruptcy in the history of the world to give everybody religion, and start to, you know, start to look at each other and say, hey, you know, maybe we should be in the same boat rowing together. Detroit was infamous for divisions of all kinds. It's sort of like the, again, symbolic, I guess, you know, if you're looking at America's conflicts kind of on steroids, you know, so you had race relation issues, you had union management issues, you had east side, west side, you had suburban versus the city. I mean, it goes, you know, on and on and on, and people they tend to live in very ethnic, you know, areas. And so that's just a huge challenge, but like I said, when you have a bankruptcy, which was the next day, people started calling. Like, people knew that was the bottom. Like, what worse can happen? The city went bankrupt. So people started calling. To me, I really, and that's what I started off saying with the For More Than Profit, balancing this profit motive with also, you know, the mission motive, and understanding they're not in conflict, that they work together. And once that strategy and philosophy started kicking in, we have 17,000 full-time people downtown Detroit now, and we're attracting, that's our people, are not in all of that, make sure I clarify that, but we're attracting them from Yale, Harvard, Brown, I mean, you name it, Stanford, and because they're attracted, and, you know, the generation, I don't know how old you are exactly, but the generation look pretty young to me, but you know.
Thank you.
You know,
I'm a millennial. We'll get to that later.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Well, I had a 44-year-old tell me the other day they were a millennial or something. I go, well, you know, I don't know.
Believe that.
You know, if I do the math.
I'm right on the cusp of the edge, and I think 44 is probably too old. But
it's one of those letter YZX, or is it, I don't know, baby boomer? I don't know. so I don't know what I was saying now.
We were talking about, you were talking about the bankruptcy, giving everyone religion, and also the role that you have taken on. Are there things that the public sector wasn't able to, until, for lack of a better term, you know, pick up and do on its own, and that you filled that void for them while they get it together?
And it's some of it is capital, and some of it is flat out contributions to the right groups doing the right things, but a lot of it has nothing to do with it. It has to do with a high employee or motivated workforce to do things. I'll give you one example of that since you asked the question. So Detroit Public Schools, after the bankruptcy of the city, which is actually a separate entity than the schools there, they had 50 or 60 years of diplomas in cabinets, paper diplomas. So let's put aside the people who don't graduate. Let's talk about everyone who graduated since 1950 whose employer still wants to verify they graduated high school.
Yeah.
After the bankruptcy of Detroit, they would forget it. You walked in a room probably double the size of this with cabinets. Yeah, it's almost like out of a movie. You couldn't believe it. And so we wrote a program for them. We to scan in every single one of these diplomas since 1950, and we took 300 of our people volunteered every week for 9 months. That's how long it took. And went in there, 300 people a week, it did probably 5 hours a day, and just to scan this stuff. And now, 9 months, now we have a whole digital system. Now, people would say if you're the pure sort of spreadsheet person, well, geez, you know, you wasted all that money you had to pay for your people to do. First of all, those people, our team, they figure out how to do their work and get it done. Okay, it gets done. You're not that, so I don't buy into that one-to-one type of thing. And secondly, the morale and what you get for that, the feeling that, and at that time, I was probably maybe, I don't know, 5,000 to 6,000 people over the course of those 9 months were involved in it. You just can't, it's invaluable. You can't even measure it. It's so important, and makes them love what they're doing better, love their company, love their community, get more involved, and it just sort of feeds in itself.
Well, and it's such a huge help to the community. Anyone who's sat in line at the DMV to renew a driver's license, or if you've gotten married and changed your name and had to go to the Social Security office, those are frustrating events. If it's very frustrating just to get your high school diploma or your transcript that you need for enrolling in college, getting a job, any of those things, that's a huge boost to anyone that's just trying to make their life better.
No question, and the point is that employers who have a lot of people, and you don't even need a lot, let me back off that a little bit. If you have 50 people, 70 people, 100 people, 500, it doesn't really matter. There are projects galore that you just pick one off and have them, so you're lending them to a community or an organization or the city, and it's going to do the opposite. It's going to attract better people, better talent from all over. I'll give you one more. We created this thing called a winternship, okay? A winternship. That's 3 weeks in January. Now, I just learned this because I didn't go to Ivy League schools. They wouldn't look at me, right? So, but I guess the Ivy League schools they don't go back from Christmas to like Groundhog's Day or something, okay? So, which is February 2nd, biggest holiday, second biggest holiday in Detroit outside of Christmas. No, and so we, just this January, because I met with all these folks, we had 18 kids, not call them kids, I'm sorry, but college from Harvard, Brown, and Yale, and they were like, I've got to get the number right, something like 80 applicants. Now, if I would have told you 5 years ago, 7 years ago, even 3 years ago, that we're going to have 3 weeks of folks from Ivy League schools do a winternship in the middle of January in downtown Detroit, you would have put me away in some kind of place. I mean, literally, that's how.
It doesn't sound very pleasant to be in downtown Detroit in the middle of winter, right?
Yeah, but that's my point. We got them to do it, and it's the second or third year, and because they get so much out of participating and doing it, and now we've got a shot at them when they graduate. So there's another benefit for the profit-making side. They work together, and that's the key thing. And I think the rhetoric sometimes that goes on before this latest stuff in America, even before that was evil, greedy capitalist corporation and the rest of the do-gooders. And the reality of that is not true. And I think though both sides can do things to work together that help both sides.
I want to go back to this. You talked about the buy-in from your employees to do this project with the transcripts. Talk to me about the culture that you have instilled in your companies and how that motivates your employees to go out and do more.
So our flagship business is Quicken Loans, and Texas is a great state for us, I want you to know. So we are now America's largest residential lender. We passed up Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, all that in the last year. And we're in a commodity business. So a commodity business, a mortgage is a mortgage. One doesn't come with air conditioning and the other without it, right? I mean, it's the same. It's almost the ultimate commodity. And pricing in the mortgage business, or we call it interest rate, closing costs, whatever you want to call it, pretty close for certain credit grade, the good credit grades, close. Now, if that's the case, out of 30,000 lenders and brokers, and this isn't to brag here, but it's the reason, because it comes back to culture. How do you emerge and pass up all 29,000 plus other lenders when you don't have a product that's proprietary in any way? and your pricing is competitive, but you're not out there like Walmart or the lowest price ever. That's not our deal, and it's hard to do in any business, let alone a commodity business. So the reason is our culture, which we reflect in these little books we're giving away, I think, on the way out today. Normally $19.99 plus shipping and handling, but not here. Give it free, okay? So it's these 19 cutesy little sayings that drive our culture that we put in place many years ago, and that we don't just talk the talk, we truly walk the walk on these things. And what it does is give our people a definition of who we are. That's what a culture is to me, not what you do, who you are. And it drives four things. It's a compass for them to drive decision-making, prioritization, actions, and behaviors. Because without it, you know, everybody runs into something called 24 hours. So you can muscle out a business, muscle it out, and then it gets away from you. So, you know, why do entrepreneurs hit this ceiling most of the time? This worked for them from 0 to 30. It worked, and all of a sudden, boom. That's because, you know, the things that got them from here to here, very different than the things that get them from here to here. And sometimes being in the fishbowl, you don't sort of know that. Somebody's got to tell you. But so what this does here, this philosophy, it's, you know, sort of these well thought out definitions of who we are, so they know which path. You know, I'm not going to be right 100% of the time. Like if something goes wrong, I generally don't call somebody up and say, hey, you know, hey, Bob, let me use millennial names. Hey, Brooke, hey, Matthew, or Josh, or whatever it is. I say, you know, I know you know who you believe it. You do believe it. So one of ours is, you know, obsessed with finding a better way, or the inches we need. And I go, yeah, no, I do believe it. I go, so this decision you made, or what? And then it just sort of clicks in. You know, it's one thing to have this and to put it out if you're an organization. It's another thing to get them to see through that lens. Like people can recite things in memory, you know, they can have a good memory on things and all that, but they can't, you know, necessarily see through it until you know, it's got to come from the leadership all across.
Do you feel like this culture that you've instilled in your company has, you know, you've obviously led in downtown, more businesses have joined you. Do you feel like this culture is starting to seep into the rest of the community in Detroit? And it is sort of a culture of entrepreneurship and a culture of success.
Started off that way. Detroit was the Silicon Valley of its day, right? Back in the, you know, car companies that were emerging. People forget that General Motors was a merger of many little auto companies, I guess. I don't know the exact number. You know, then it got down to 4, then it got down to 3. But then I think there were a period of, you know, 70 years, whatever you want to call it, where it became only a sort of, you graduate high school, you go to work in the factory, you get a pension, things go well, overtime, you get a house up north, second home. You know, it's not for everybody, of course, but I think the entrepreneurial sort of spirit went away. You had these big companies, right? And then there were some supplier companies that were entrepreneurial to the auto companies, but I think now things have really turned. I mean, you know, we just had our first unicorn in Detroit that was started 3 years ago, a company called StockX, which is the stock market of things. We got 600 people, started in downtown Detroit 36 months ago. That's just on a trajectory. Again, one of those kinds of things 3, 5, 7 years ago, you say that can't happen there. It can only happen in Silicon Valley or Boston or wherever. But, you know, there's nothing indigenous to the land for technology. Right? Yeah. It's about people and talent, which is why I go back to the original thing for your first question. Well, how do you get the best talent? Well, this talent today is attracted to some kind of mission-based initiative.
Yeah. Do you feel like you have two contributions really as a private sector actor here? You have the actual financial investments that you've made, and then you do have this, you know, changing of the mindset, changing the culture. Which do you think is more impactful?
Wait, what was the first one again?
Financial investment, and then the cultural investment. Which is more impactful?
That's a great question. I don't know if you could do one without the other. Although I think if you put, I guess I can say it here. You put a gun to my head, okay? You know, you could, and I had to make a decision. You know, you would say culturally, right? Mm-hmm. Culturally. Is because money without culture, without purpose, or without a noble sort of stated crystal clear mission, whatever it is that you want to do, and as long as it's a good thing for the world and the community, and not having an expectation back right away. Like we try to support things that aren't not political. Either doesn't matter. We support things that are going to make a difference and impact the community. It's amazing. It's like magic. It's like literally watching magic occur of how people, and I try to hire a lot of younger people as well as people who are advanced in age. You know, I don't mean advanced like advanced, but I'm saying, you know, not all millennials, okay? But
you can hire all millennials. I'll take you with that.
But I'm saying it's truly remarkable when you sort of free people of the shackles of corporate. You know, it was broke for a long time, and it still is in a lot of areas. It's, you know, the bureaucracy is not.
But you've unleashed your creativity.
You unleash creativity, ideas. You let people. I think when you look at that, what's that pyramid called? The
Maslow's hierarchy.
Yeah, I think when you take away all the sort of the things that you need, air and food, and drink, I think the mattering, people knowing that what they're doing is impacting others is right there and below all that stuff, and it's the next level. And I think I see it every day.
We've talked a lot about successes, so now we're going to talk about places where it's not been as easy or places that have failed. Where have you found the challenges to be, and what are the lessons that you've learned in that process?
Well, if you try to run an NBA team, you're going to remember 3.3.
I didn't mention this, but for those of you who don't know, you own the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah, now this year is probably not a great year to admit that, but you know, last 4 years.
We live in Dallas, the Mavs didn't do that well, so.
Well, I'll tell you what, that kid you got is special.
Yeah.
You know, is special. You know what I'm talking about.
Dirk.
Well, Dirk retired. Okay. So just yesterday, right, last night. Yeah, you know, when you're in professional sports, it's completely different. I think the president knows that.
With baseball, yes.
With baseball. Yes. You have one out of, let's put it this way, 97% of all the teams are going to fail at the end of the year, right? Yeah. If you're judging it by who's the champion. So that, you know, 3.3%, at least in our league, you know, 30 teams. And you usually, if you're an entrepreneur or if you're running a community organization or part of a government, usually you walk in the morning, you got like 50, 100, 200, 500 levers you can pull on. Well, you know, when you're in the NBA type of thing or professional, you can draft for better talent. That's 1 day a year. And you got to be pretty good at doing it, sometimes get lucky at it. You can have free agency and that's hire, but sign free agents. That's about 5 days in the summer. And then you could trade. Well, a team has to want to trade with you. They got to both, you both agree to that. So you can't, like, when things are going bad, you can't like walk in and have all these things you can do. So you are stuck with, you know, what you have for a period of time, and it's a longer term. And that goes against, I think, what entrepreneurs, you know, how they roll, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a conflict, and usually whether it's Mark Cuban or myself or others, you go through this period where you get killed for a while until you learn what's going on, and you do stupid things like I did, many of them, and then you finally start to understand and get it, and hopefully be competitive after that.
So what are there specific lessons you learned from moving your companies downtown, you know, buy-in from the community or working with the government, the local government?
Yeah, well, the government here, the mayor of Detroit, which I think is one of the most undertold stories. And I remember, again, I'm trying to not get any of the political stuff, but whether you were on the left or the right, when you saw an African-American win the presidency, there was some, I think most people were saying that's, in America, whether you agreed or voted for, it doesn't matter. I'm just saying is in America. Now in Detroit, which people don't know, a white man won an election on a write-in ballot against a formidable African-American candidate with an 85% African-American population. I thought that was, you know, again, whether or not people liked him, didn't, to me that was like, you know, those two things to me stand, so, you know, America's still, you know, we're in a pretty good place when it comes to that. People care about the same things, and there's common ground where people can you know, get together. We have examples of that, right? And so the mayor of Detroit, and by the way, there was he had to do it on a write-in candidate standpoint because he missed a deadline on the signatures, and then they ran another Mike Duggan against him, who was a barber. So you had to choose Michael Duggan or Mike Duggan, and you had to remember which one to write it in. I mean,
that's not the first time that's happened. There are other races across the country where that happens. That's politics.
It's crazy. But he won, and he is so loved, I think, he won the last election, but I think it was close to 70%. I mean, he is, you know, you have to have, but you can't have a strong private sector that wants to get involved and do partnerships in a bad public sector, or the reverse. You need both. I mean, both sides have got to swim together. And in Detroit, we have the foundations also in that. We have the community groups. You know, we're one of the most diverse cities in America. You know, there's people from everywhere, you know, age, color, creed, everywhere. And it's just an exciting place to be.
Do you feel that you have led, you've obviously led in Detroit. Do you see that this is changing in other cities that have struggled in the U.S.? Are there other companies that are taking the model that you have and leading in their communities in the same way?
Yeah, you do see that, and you see it both from people who are leaders of the cities, whether private or public sector, but you also see it in the venture capital. Like Steve Case, I'm not sure if you know, so he was one of the founders of AOL, long-term CEO. He started this fund called Rise of the Rest, and his concept is that, you know, besides the coast, he wants to invest in technology companies, the rest, quote unquote. And they've had some great successes, and he's recruited a lot of folks who are successful entrepreneurs in technology to put their own money into the fund. And again, that's another example, in my opinion, of where capitalism and mission can just work together. And so you see some success in Cleveland and Detroit and Pittsburgh, Indianapolis, and there's more than that. And it's surprising because I see a lot of the deals I invested into his fund, and we talk a lot, and it's remarkable how smart and how entrepreneurial various places and pockets are in the country. You never expect I think there's a rocket company in Traverse City, Michigan. I know there's a rocket people here, I think. And of course, we're now, you know, Rocket Mortgage, which is another thing. But you know, Traverse City, Michigan, I guess in North, you know, it's in the, I don't know if you guys know this, we started to do the Lower Peninsula like your mitten.
The mitten, yeah.
So it'd be like over here. And it's, you know, it's pretty successful from what I understand. And you hear, that's not the only example of this kind of thing. But again, technology is not indigenous to the land. And we have to keep reminding everybody of that.
You've hit on this a couple times now about technology and the knowledge economy, and it's about people rather than resources on the ground. That's one of the things that we look at in economic growth because of the fundamental shift in what our economy has done over the last 20 years. Do you feel, you know, this is, I think, a pressure point. A lot of people feel like the knowledge economy has left too many people behind, that there's lack of resilience. Do you feel optimistic about the way this is going?
I do, and I'll give you a few reasons why I do. First of all, let's just say we're back in the economy 1.0. Now, I'm in Detroit, and I want to raise money to make something, which we're doing still, and we're trying to bring in a lot of that back, but make it with the technology slant, technology piece of that. So a plant, from the time you conceive it, okay, I need to build a plant from scratch, what is that? 200 million, 300 million, 500 million, you can pick your number depending on the size. And how many years is it before something's rolling off? 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Good stuff, good long-term investment. In the digital economy, as I told you earlier, so there was an idea 36 months ago about, you know, allowing people to trade sneakers or trade watches or trade, and when I say trade, I mean buy and sell, like the stock market. And now it's 3 years later, and we have 600 people, and we have $1 billion plus valuation. That just doesn't happen in that. And so the speed of the game, allows, look, if you're in the city rebuilding business anywhere in the world or anywhere in America, what a great time to be alive, because you got ways and levers again that, you know, man, you can do it faster and with less capital, or spread out that capital, and you don't need that 100% success rate necessarily in the businesses. So I do think that there's a problem in America about, I just read some numbers lately, because all the tech gets all the sort of the glory, and they're the rock stars and all this, but, you know, almost like rock stars. You see so much, but people think entrepreneurism or entrepreneurialism, depending on, you can go to dictionary.com.
Yes, you can.
But you see it's deep, and it's deep in technology, but the other places, the other parts of the economy, we have less. I think there's less business startups in the last couple of years on a certain run rate than the last 30 years or something. People are shocked when they hear that. They go, what do you mean? I thought that's the thing today. There's a lot of media around technology, but we need more encouragement, more, I guess, in the public schools. I think also, I don't think there's anything taught in, I mean, we
are less entrepreneurial. I mean, we know this. Yeah. The native-born population doesn't create businesses at the same rate that the immigrant population does. We do have a slower small business formation rate, and small businesses are where jobs are really started and created, and that is a growth engine for our economy.
Yeah, but now that you're an academic in these groups, now for sure I know it's true. Okay, so because I just sort of go off the cuff and I say these things, but I got credibility now. But I really think that that's something that, you know, both sides, again, political parties should be promoting in a big way. What is better than job and wealth creation out of nothing? It's what built our country in the last, you know, whatever, 250 plus years. I heard Warren Buffett say something that I thought was incredibly interesting, and he said that, you know, he's really, really optimistic about the next 100 years in America. And you say, like, why is that? And he says, well, look what we did with using maybe 30% of the brain power of the population. Yeah. So women, minorities weren't given the same kind of opportunities and access and all that today exists.
The gap's closing. Yeah.
The gap is closing. There's ways to go, but it's closing. He says when we get up to, you know, 100%, or we're going to have 100% of at least access or opportunity, man, what happens with this country? So I thought that was a great point.
I want to go back. You said something about the speed of the game. And one of the reasons in researching you, one of the reasons that one of the stories told about why you moved downtown is you were interviewing a millennial candidate who was like, I can't imagine being out here amongst highways and concrete and not having anywhere to walk. As I mentioned, I'm a millennial. One of the things that drives me absolutely crazy is when I go to events or panels or discussions and someone is saying, you know, we really need to figure out how to attract millennials. Okay. I'm 36. I've been in the workforce for more than a decade. If you're just now thinking about how to attract millennials, you're way behind. Yeah. and that to me, you know, you've been thinking about that for a while. And I'm concerned that there are big businesses that are behind the ball on this, that they are not doing what they need to do and keeping up with the current generations to adapt. Yeah,
you know, that's good news if you're an entrepreneur or I'll use your language, or not your, my kids are like late teens, early 20s. They use this concept, are you woke to that, okay? Or they use other words too.
Yeah.
So it is so 100% accurate what you're talking about, and I do get concerned sometimes when I have meetings with CEOs of large companies, public companies, we're talking about some kind of, you know, joint venture or something, some partnership, and this comes up, and, you know, I think they're starting to become more and more aware of it, but the story that you did your research, the story that you're telling is a true story. So you asked a few minutes back, well, you know, why did we move downtown? Well, in the self-interest part was the following, is that we were sort of one of the only, not only, but one of the handful, I guess we call like a cool, you know, company in the Detroit area that we told ourselves that story. And when we go to University of Michigan, Michigan State, Wayne State, and others, we were like, you know, we were the princess at the ball kind of thing. You know, all of a sudden we started noticing in 2000, it must have been 8, 9, 10, 7, you know, in there, the last half of that decade that I think is still unnamed, so I can't refer to it. But it's like, you know, we're losing people. They're going to Chicago. I go, what happened with that kid? I thought you liked it. Well, he's going to Chicago. He's going to New York. And so I said, they lost this kid they thought was going to be a superstar, 22-year-old, University of Michigan, computer engineering graduate, and we thought we had him. So I said, have him come in. I want to talk to him. So he comes in, and we were at the time in a suburban office, 4 stories, and when you look out our window, if you want to talk about a sea of asphalt and parking, it was like February or something. So I come in, I think it was, I don't remember his name, so it's either Josh or Matthew, okay? So I said, let's say, call him Matthew. So I say, hey Matthew, so what happened? I know you're not taking our offer. He goes, well, Mr. Gilbert, I love your company, I love the opportunity, but come with me to the window. This kid took me to the window. He goes, you see all that parking? I go, yeah. He goes, it's February. He goes, I'm going to park 300 yards over there, and I'm going to walk in this building here. Nice building, great place, great company. I'm going to spend 8, 9, 10 hours, whatever I'm going to. And you could actually see, he goes, see that Max and Irma's over there? I go, yeah. He goes, that's the only place I can eat dinner. He goes, and then see those apartments over there? They're nice, but he goes, I don't want to come here in the morning, walk down asphalt, 300 yards, go there only, go to my apartment and start the whole thing again. I want a city. I want culture. I want diversity. I want thinking. I want happenstance. I want arts. I want this. I want that. And it hit me we're gonna be dead here soon if we don't. Because you started hearing that before, but this kid really. So he went to Chicago. I couldn't even get him. I thought that's when my sales skills really started to deteriorate. But he changed. He was like the icing on the sort of the cake of, man, we got it. So that's where we really also started getting serious about Detroit. And from day one, and I kid you not, you know, we moved down with 1,400 people, and again, now it's 17,000 plus. Not day 2, not day 3, but day 1 in Detroit was nothing like it is today. It was, you knew. Everybody who came just knew. You couldn't even explain it. It was a feeling, and we've been blessed as it keeps going in the right direction.
Well, we could talk all day. Thank you so much.
Good. Well, thank you.
Thanks for
Appreciate
being on
it.
stage with
Thank
us.
you. Thank you.
We're going to stay right
Okay.
And thank you, Dan. You're a rock star. And both panels today, we've heard rock stars in action. We're going to now break. Lunch is outside and across the hall at the Hall of State. During the lunch break, the museum and the special exhibit are open. You can access them from the courtyard. Also, if you want to go outside, the Native Texas Park and the Carolyn and David Miller Amphitheater is open as well, and the staff can direct you. At 1:15, we'll have our 2 concurrent sessions entitled Studio 43, Transformations and Foundations. In the Hall of State room, we will focus on the emerging frontier of space, and in this room, we'll focus on technological transformations and threats, and then the afternoon session will begin at 2:05. So anyway, thank you all for a wonderful morning, and thank you again.